"You are no longer Duchess of Ravenswick," Sebastian told Clara before the entire county. "You surrendered that privilege when you betrayed the crown." The words crossed the candle-lit assembly hall with the clean force of a blade. Conversations died beneath the painted ceiling. Landowners, naval officers, magistrates, and their jeweled wives turned toward Clara as though treason might be contagious. She stood alone inside the doorway, rain glistening in her long black hair. Her burgundy traveling gown was soaked almost to the knees, and one sleeve had been torn while crossing the flooded northern road. She had arrived without a carriage, jewels, or servant, nothing that remained of the woman who had once ruled Ravenswick Hall beside her husband. Sebastian stood on the raised platform beneath the ducal crest. He was as imposing as Clara remembered, tall, broad-shouldered. His dark blonde hair swept back from the small scar at his temple. His navy tailcoat and silver waistcoat were immaculate. Only the tension in his blue eyes betrayed that her appearance had unsettled him. Beside him waited Lady Octavia Fenwick, radiant in ivory silk and sapphires. An unsigned engagement contract lay open before them. Clara removed her wet gloves finger by finger. "I surrendered nothing," she said. "You took my position after refusing me 48 hours to prove those naval charts were false." A restless murmur moved through the hall. 9 months earlier, Sebastian had found restricted harbor maps in Clara's locked cabinet. Her annotations marked unguarded coves, patrol times, and the depth required by a heavily laden smuggling vessel. Her personal cipher appeared in the margins. Lord Percival Dane had produced a fisherman who swore Clara had met French agents near the lighthouse. Sebastian had granted her one private interview. Clara had asked him to compare the ink, paper, and tidal calculations. She had begged for 2 days, not forgiveness, merely time. He had looked at the evidence, remembered that her father once supplied charts to the Royal Navy, and chosen suspicion over the wife who had managed his coast for 4 years. By sunset, he had signed the separation agreement and placed every harbor account under Percival's authority. Now Percival stood near the magistrate's table, one hand resting casually upon his cane. His courteous smile had not changed, but Clara saw his fingers tighten around the silver handle. That small reaction steadied her. She reached into the pocket of her cloak and placed a blackened iron key beside Sebastian's engagement contract. Several guests recoiled from the mud it left on the white linen. "This was found beneath the body of Elias Bell," Clara said. A thin girl entered behind her. She could not have been more than 12. Her brown dress had been carefully mended, and both hands gripped a rolled tide table against her chest. Sebastian's gaze shifted toward the child. "Who is she?" "Martha Bell. Her father maintained the northern sluice until he disappeared 11 days ago." "Disappeared?" Sebastian repeated. "You said he was dead." "I said the key was found beneath his body. The corpse pulled from the channel wore his coat and carried his tools, but Martha says the dead man was not her father." Percival stepped forward. "Your Grace, this woman is already accused of conspiring with smugglers. Now she brings a frightened child into a public gathering and invents a corpse to interrupt your engagement." "I did not bring her to interrupt an engagement," Clara replied. "I brought her because the northern floodgate has been sealed from the landward side." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Sebastian's face. He concealed it almost immediately. "The gates were inspected last month, by men appointed by Percival after you removed mine." Percival's smile vanished. "That accusation requires evidence." Clara unrolled the tide table. Her father had taught her to calculate the pressure of water before she was old enough to attend a London season. For 4 years, those calculations had protected Ravenswick's marsh villages and grain warehouses. Sebastian knew it. He had once praised her work before the Admiralty. Tonight, however, he did not descend from the platform. "Enough," he said. You entered this hall in defiance of my written order. You will submit to the magistrate, and your claims will be investigated without further spectacle." He turned to Sir Edmund Harrow and extended his hand for the prepared warrant. Clara watched Sebastian take the quill. Even now he could pause. He could order the northern gate examined. He could question Martha privately or send riders to the marsh. Instead, he signed. The scratch of the nib was almost inaudible, yet Clara felt something within her finally sever. She had not returned to save their marriage, but until that moment, some wounded part of her had still hoped Sebastian would recognize the difference between dignity and deceit. 2 constables approached. Martha retreated behind Clara, staring at Sebastian's hand, her eyes fixed upon the heavy gold signet ring he had used to seal the warrant. "That is the mark," the girl whispered. Clara turned. "What mark?" "The gentleman pressed it into the wood." Martha pointed at Sebastian's ring with a trembling finger. "It was burned onto every crate they carried through our gate." Silence swallowed the hall. Sebastian looked down at the Ravenswick crest on his hand. "What crates?" Martha's face drained of color as she noticed Percival moving toward the side door. The ones filled with gunpowder. At that instant, a deep concussion rolled in from the northern coast. The windows trembled in their frames, and every candle flame bent toward the sea. The windows shuddered again, and this time a narrow pane above Lady Octavia fractured from corner to corner. Guests screamed and surged away from the northern wall, while the musicians abandoned their instruments. Clara did not move. She counted the seconds between the concussion and the faint vibration beneath her shoes, judging distance through the stone floor, as her father had taught her on the docks. "That was not the floodgate," she said. "The sound came from farther west, the retaining wall, beside the grain quay." Sebastian was already descending from the platform. "Seal every door," he ordered the constables. "No one leaves this hall." Clara turned sharply toward the side entrance, but Percival had vanished. His silver-handled cane lay beneath a chair, abandoned so hastily that it was still rocking against the floorboards. "Your cousin has already left." Sebastian's jaw tightened. He dispatched 2 constables after Percival, then reached for Martha. The girl recoiled from him and clutched Clara's cloak. "Do not touch her," Clara said. It was the first boundary she had spoken, as though Sebastian possessed no greater authority than any other man in the room. His hand stopped in mid-air. "She is a witness under my protection. You signed a warrant against me 3 minutes ago. Your protection presently inspires little confidence." Pain flashed across his face, quickly buried beneath command. "Then tell me what must be done." Clara looked toward the guests who had spent 9 months repeating that she had betrayed them. Several landowners now watched her with desperate expectation. They remembered the winter surge of 1812, when she had ordered the eastern drainage channels opened against Percival's advice, and saved more than 300 acres of wheat. They remembered it, but not one of them had spoken when Sebastian expelled her. "Ring the harbor alarm," she said. "Send every available wagon to the lower marsh. Move the tenants uphill to St. Ormond's Church. The grain crews must not approach the western quay until we know which charges have ignited." Sir Edmund Harrow frowned. "A woman accused of aiding smugglers cannot issue commands to the county militia." "Then you may explain your concern to the drowned," Clara replied. Sebastian took the bell rope from the magistrate's hand and pulled it himself. The iron alarm above the roof began tolling across Ravenswick. One clear act did not erase his signature on her warrant, but it shifted the room. Officers moved, servants fetched lanterns. Men who had ignored Clara's warning now repeated her instructions, as though they had originated from the Duke. Clara knelt beside Martha and unrolled the tide table across the floor. The girl had carried it beneath her dress to protect the paper from the rain. Blue ink marked daily water levels, while Elias Bell's cramped writing filled the margins. Clara traced the final entries. "Your father made these measurements?" Martha nodded. "Every dawn and evening. He said the new numbers were wrong." "What new numbers?" The ones Mr. Dane's men brought from the estate office. Father said they made the high tide look 2 feet lower. Clara's stomach tightened. Percival had not merely neglected the gates. Someone had altered the official calculations so that missing repairs and unusual ship movements would appear harmless. She examined the last column and found a tiny cross beside 4 consecutive nights. It was the same symbol Elias once used to mark vessels traveling without harbor lamps. "Why did you come to me instead of the magistrate?" Clara asked. "Father told me to find the lady at the lighthouse if he did not return. He said you were the only person who would understand the false moon." Clara glanced at the lunar phase printed above the table. It showed a waning quarter, yet the tide heights corresponded to a full moon. The mistake was too obvious for an experienced keeper. It was not an error. It was a signal intended specifically for someone trained by a chartmaker. Sebastian crouched opposite her. "What does it mean?" "It means Elias knew the records were being replaced. It also means whoever forged them did not understand why tide tables include the moon." A gust forced smoke beneath the western doors. Moments later, a broad man, in a weather-darkened naval coat, pushed past the constables. Captain Gideon Shaw had served as Ravenswick's harbour master until Percival dismissed him for refusing to approve unregistered cargo. His greying hair was wet, and blood streaked one cheek. He looked first at Clara, not Sebastian. "The retaining wall is damaged, my lady, but it has not collapsed. Your old overflow channels carried off the first surge." A murmur passed through the assembly. Those channels had been Clara's design, built with money she saved by renegotiating the estate's shipping contracts. Percival had publicly claimed the achievement after Sebastian stripped her name from the harbour records. "How many are injured?" she asked. 6 dockmen. No deaths yet. The villagers from Bell's Row are already moving uphill because you taught their wardens the alarm procedure before your exile." Sebastian's gaze lowered for a moment. The estate had survived the first explosion because of work performed by the wife he had branded a traitor. "Captain," he said, "take 20 men and secure the northern gate." Gideon did not move. "With respect, Your Grace, I no longer command your harbour. Lord Percival dismissed me, and you confirmed his authority." The consequence landed visibly. By signing Percival's appointment, Sebastian had removed the experienced men he now needed. Clara rose and handed Martha's tide table to Gideon. "The fishing crews will follow you if I ask them, but they are not to risk their lives protecting warehouses while families remain below the floodline." She faced Sebastian. "If you want my help, Martha stays with Mrs. Alden at the church, guarded by 2 men of Gideon's choosing. I will not surrender her to your magistrate, and I will not enter your custody." "And your warrant?" Sebastian asked. Clara looked at the ink still drying beside Octavia's engagement contract. "You chose to sign it. You may decide what it costs you." Before he could answer, the western doors flew open, and a mud-covered rider stumbled into the hall. "Your Grace," he gasped, "we reached the northern sluice. The gate is open, and the sea wall is holding." Relief swept across the room, but the rider had not finished. "The water flooding the marsh is not coming from the sea. Someone opened the inland reservoir, and every lock bears the Duke of Ravenswick's personal seal." "The inland reservoir?" Clara repeated. "How quickly is it emptying?" The rider struggled for breath. "Both western channels are open, my lady. Water has crossed the lower road and reached the first grain field." Clara seized the tide table from Gideon and calculated the remaining pressure. The reservoir held enough water to drown the marsh villages without assistance from the sea, but its channels had been designed to irrigate crops, not release a sudden flood. If both gates remained open, the embankment beneath St. Ormond's church would soften and collapse before dawn. "Gideon, take the fishing crews to the eastern overflow trench," she ordered. "Clear every obstruction and cut the final barrier only when the church bell strikes twice." Gideon nodded, then selected 2 former naval men to escort Martha to Mrs. Alden. Clara crouched before the child. "Stay inside the church until I return. Tell no one else what your father said about the crates." Martha caught her hand. Mr. Dane knows I saw them. Clara looked toward Percival's abandoned cane. Then he will have to pass 2 armed sailors to reach you. Sebastian summoned horses, but Lady Octavia stepped between him and the doors. Surely you are not riding into a flood on the word of a woman accused of treason. Her tone was gentle enough to resemble concern, yet her pale eyes remained fixed upon the muddy key lying beside the engagement contract. Clara's calculations saved the lower estate once before, Sebastian said. It was not an apology. It was merely a fact he could no longer deny. Octavia's mouth tightened, and the charts found in her cabinet nearly delivered your coastline to French smugglers. Clara lifted the iron key before Octavia could reach it. This belongs to the northern sluice. I will keep it. Do you imagine I intended to steal it? I have learned not to confuse an elegant glove with an empty hand. Sebastian's expression sharpened, but a second rider arrived, shouting that water had reached Bell's Row. There was no time for another public argument. He ordered Octavia to remain at the hall and assist Sir Edmund in organizing the evacuation lists. In doing so, he gave her access to the magistrate's table, the harbor reports, and every document Clara had brought. Clara saw the danger immediately. The tide table comes with me. She rolled it beneath her cloak and followed Sebastian into the rain. They rode north along the ridge road, while lanterns moved like scattered stars across the fields below. Black water covered the lower lanes, carrying branches, broken fences, and pale sheaves of winter straw. Clara's mare slipped twice in the mud, but she refused Sebastian's hand when he reached for her reins. 9 months earlier, he had sent her to the ruined lighthouse, with £20 in separate maintenance and instructions never to enter Ravenswick property. She had survived by repairing fishermen's charts and teaching their daughters to keep accounts. She would not now pretend that his concern restored the trust he had destroyed. "Why did you remain here?" he asked as they descended toward the reservoir. "You could have gone to your sister in Bath and abandoned the families whose leases I negotiated. They were no longer your responsibility. That is the difference between us, Sebastian. You believe responsibility ends when a document says it does." He absorbed the rebuke in silence. At the reservoir control house, they found the outer door hanging open. The watchman lay unconscious beside the wall, breathing shallowly from a wound above his ear. Clara checked him before examining the gate mechanism. The main levers had been chained in the open position. Fresh red wax filled the lock, impressed with the Ravenswick crest. Sebastian touched his signet ring, then bent closer. "It is my seal. It is your crest," Clara corrected. "That is not the same thing." She scraped a fragment of wax free with the edge of the blackened key. Embedded inside was a short piece of ordinary cream-colored thread. It appeared insignificant, but Clara wrapped it carefully in her handkerchief. "Official sealing cord is blue and twisted from 3 strands. This is sewing silk." Sebastian stared at the wax. Any lady's maid could possess such thread. He had noticed the contradiction, yet his voice reached instinctively for a harmless explanation. Clara felt the old injury stir, but she did not waste time fighting him. The chained levers mattered more. She studied the gearing and found the safety release Percival's men had overlooked. A narrow maintenance catch hidden behind the lower wheel. Her father had insisted upon installing one in every gate after a mechanism trapped 2 laborers years earlier. Clara inserted the northern sluice key. It did not fit the lock, but its iron shaft was narrow enough to force the catch upward. "When I release this, the lever will fall with enough force to crush a man," she warned. "Stand behind the stone pillar and pull the chain when I give the word." Sebastian removed his coat and wrapped the chain around his hands. Together they strained against the pressure until the first gate descended. Water hammered the barrier, spraying through the control house windows. The second lever followed, and the roar beneath the floor weakened. It was a small victory, but it came too late to save the grain fields. From the doorway, Clara watched dark water spread across hundreds of acres Sebastian had placed under Percival's protection. He knew the safety catch existed, Sebastian said. Percival inspected these gates with you. He watched me demonstrate it 4 years ago. Sebastian's face hardened as the first true suspicion of his cousin took root. A stable boy galloped up moments later, carrying a message from the assembly hall. Lady Octavia sent this for his grace. Sebastian broke the seal and read aloud. The Duchess's papers have been secured in the Ravenswick archive for examination. Sir Edmund advises that Clara be returned under guard immediately. Clara looked at the cream thread binding the folded note. It was identical to the strand trapped inside the false seal. Before she could speak, she noticed 3 words written faintly beneath Octavia's message, visible where rain had thinned the ink. They were not addressed to Sebastian. Burn Bell's original table. Sebastian went still. Behind them, on the ridge above the flooded marsh, flames suddenly rose from the windows of the Ravenswick archive. Clara was in the saddle before Sebastian finished shouting for the horses. They drove their mounts up the ridge toward Ravenswick Hall, the burning archive growing brighter with every stride. Flames climbed through the eastern windows and curled beneath the slate roof, illuminating the flooded marsh in a ghastly orange glow. Servants ran across the courtyard carrying buckets, but they were throwing water against stone walls while the fire consumed the timber shelves within. "Stop the bucket line," Clara shouted as she dismounted. The steward, now responsible for the house, stared at her as though the disgraced duchess had no right to speak. Sebastian repeated the command, and only then did the servants obey. Clara swallowed the familiar insult. There was no time to demand recognition. "The archive has an iron fire door between the account room and the map chamber," she told Sebastian. "If it is still open, the entire west wing will burn. The release lever is inside. No one enters," he said. "The ceiling may collapse." A violent pounding answered from behind the lower window shutters. Someone is already inside. Clara recognized the voice. Amos Pike, the elderly estate copyist, had preserved tenant agreements and harbor correspondence for more than 30 years. He had also been the only Ravenswick servant who sent food to the lighthouse after Sebastian froze her household allowance. Clara pulled her damp cloak over her mouth and ran toward the side entrance. Sebastian caught her arm. "I forbid it." She looked at his hand until he released her. "You forfeited the right to forbid me anything when you signed that warrant." Smoke rolled through the doorway in suffocating waves. Clara crouched low and followed the sound of Amos striking a chair against the shutters. She knew the rooms by memory. 6 steps to the account desk, 4 more to the dividing arch, then left toward the map chamber. Heat scorched her face as she found Amos pinned beneath a fallen shelf. His gray hair was singed, and blood covered one side of his collar. "The fire door," he coughed. They wedged it open. Clara saw a brass ruler driven through the floor catch, preventing the iron partition from descending. The ruler belonged to her old map desk. Someone had entered the chamber, taken an ordinary instrument bearing her initials, and used it to make the destruction appear connected to her. She dragged the ruler free. The iron door crashed down between the rooms, smothering half the flames and sealing the map chamber from the burning accounts. Clara tried to lift the shelf from Amos's legs, but it was too heavy. Sebastian appeared through the smoke, with 2 footmen behind him. He said nothing about her defiance. He simply took the weight upon his shoulders, while Clara pulled Amos clear. Together they carried him into the courtyard seconds before part of the eastern ceiling collapsed. The gathered guests cheered when Sebastian emerged from the smoke. Several men clapped him on the back and praised his courage. Clara stood only a few feet away, coughing soot into her handkerchief, while no one mentioned that she had found Amos, released the fire door, or saved the map chamber. Lady Octavia arrived in a closed carriage as servants laid Amos on a blanket. Her ivory gown remained spotless. "Thank heaven Sebastian reached him," she said loudly. "Another minute and that poor man would have died." Clara looked at her. "Sebastian reached him because I showed him where to go." Octavia's expression softened into practiced pity. Must every act of bravery become a demand for praise? The words turned Clara's contribution into vanity before the entire household. Sir Edmund stepped forward holding the warrant Sebastian had signed. Lady Clara entered a restricted archive moments before it burned. We have also found an instrument, engraved with her initials inside the mechanism that spread the fire. She must now be detained. The ruler held the fire door open, Clara said. Removing it prevented the flames from reaching the map chamber. Or you removed it when your plan failed, Octavia replied. Sebastian's wet shirt clung to his shoulders, and soot darkened the scar at his temple. He looked from the ruler to Clara, caught between what he had personally witnessed and the accusation he had already chosen to endorse. Before he could speak, Amos seized Clara's wrist. Not her, he rasped. A man came before the banquet. He carried Lord Percival's written authority and ordered me to bring Bell's original tide records from the locked cabinet. Did you recognize him? Clara asked. Amos shook his head. A scarf covered his face, but he knew the archive. He knew which key opened your old map chamber. Octavia bent toward him. You have inhaled smoke, Mr. Pike. You should not exhaust yourself with confused recollections. Amos flinched from her voice. Clara noticed the fear and moved between them, accepting the increased suspicion that came with openly shielding him. He will speak again after a physician examines him, and until then he remains under Gideon Shaw's protection. Sir Edmund raised the warrant. You possess no authority to decide that. Then arrest me, Clara said, holding out her wrists. But Amos goes to the church, not your cells. Sebastian ordered a carriage prepared for the copyist and assigned 2 of his own guards to accompany Gideon. It was the first time that night he accepted one of Clara's conditions without resisting, but he still did not revoke her warrant. As Amos was lifted into the carriage, a small brass key slipped from his waistcoat and landed in Clara's palm. He closed her fingers around it. Your map desk, he whispered. I locked the packet there before the man struck me. Percival's order is inside. Clara faced Sebastian. That desk has 2 drawers. This key opens the lower one. The upper drawer contains the duplicate impressions used to authenticate every harbor seal. Open both in front of Sir Edmund. Compare the false charts, the wax from the reservoir, and Percival's written order. You can determine tonight whether the same person handled them. Sebastian stared at the key. The evidence was less than 50 yards away, protected behind the iron fire door Clara had lowered. He had only to enter the surviving map chamber and examine it. Octavia touched his arm. Sebastian, the roof is unstable, and the Admiralty investigator arrives at dawn. If you disturb those papers now, Clara will claim you corrupted the evidence. Clara saw hesitation return to his eyes. You asked what you should do, she said quietly. This is the answer. Examine the drawer before anyone else reaches it. From within the blackened archive came the unmistakable scrape of wood sliding across stone. The scrape came again, followed by the muffled strike of a boot against timber. Clara ran toward the archive, but Sir Edmund blocked her path. No one enters until the Admiralty investigator arrives. Someone is inside now, she said. Sebastian ordered 2 guards to circle the building while he approached the surviving western door. Smoke seeped through its iron frame, but the flames beyond had weakened. Clara held out Amos's key. Open the map chamber. If the packet remains in my desk, we can establish who ordered Bell's records removed. Octavia caught Sebastian's sleeve. And if the person inside is armed, then every moment we stand here gives him time to destroy the evidence, Clara replied. A side window shattered. A dark figure dropped from the opening and landed behind the yew hedge. The guards shouted and gave chase, but the fugitive disappeared toward the stable wood. Clara saw only a long grey coat and a flash of pale fabric tied around one wrist. Cream silk. Search the chamber now, she urged, before anyone else can enter. Sebastian took the key from her, and for one breath, she believed he had finally chosen to verify the truth. Then Sir Edmund produced a folded dispatch, stamped with the Admiralty seal. The investigator's instructions are explicit, Your Grace. All evidence relating to Lady Clara's treason must remain untouched. If either you or she enters that chamber, the Crown may regard every document inside as compromised. Clara examined the dispatch from a distance. When was that delivered? An hour before the banquet. Then it was written before the reservoir was opened and before the archive burned. It cannot refer to evidence from tonight. Sir Edmund's cheeks reddened. It refers to the entire investigation. It refers to whatever you require it to refer to. Sebastian stared at the key in his palm. He could have summoned neutral witnesses, recorded the condition of the door, and opened the drawer before half the county. Instead, the fear of appearing partial toward the wife he had accused hardened his expression. The chamber will be sealed, he decided. No document will be examined until the investigator arrives. Clara felt the final fragment of hope inside her go cold. You are giving the person who set this fire 6 more hours. I am preserving the legitimacy of the inquiry. No, you are preserving the appearance of your own infallibility. His face tightened, but he did not reverse the order. Sir Edmund directed the guards to chain the western entrance and place the key in the magistrate's custody. Octavia watched without triumph, which made Clara distrust her more. A clever enemy did not smile when victory was incomplete. She studied the guests and servants gathered around the courtyard. The stable boy who had delivered Octavia's message stood near the carriage house, twisting his cap between his hands. Clara called to him, "Tell His Grace who gave you the note." The boy looked at Octavia, then at Sir Edmund. Fear overcame whatever honesty he possessed. "It was left on the hall table, my lady. I do not know who wrote it. You said Lady Octavia sent it. I may have misunderstood." Octavia gave him a forgiving smile. "The poor child is exhausted." The witness lowered his eyes and failed Clara in front of everyone. Sir Edmund unfolded Sebastian's warrant. "This delay has continued long enough. Lady Clara must be taken to the county jail, pending the Admiralty examination." Sebastian did not immediately answer. Clara saw the struggle in him, but she also understood its limit. He was troubled by contradictions. He was not yet willing to pay the cost of admitting that his judgment might have ruined an innocent woman. "The church is on higher ground," she said. "The displaced families require the lighthouse stores. My charts, boats, and personal accounts must remain available to Gideon." Sir Edmund objected. "All property used by an accused traitor should be secured. Those boats belong to the Fishing Widows Cooperative. They were purchased from their earnings, not the Ravenswick estate. They are moored on ducal land." Octavia stepped forward with apparent reluctance. "Sebastian, until the Crown determines which property may have supported smuggling, surely prudence requires temporary seizure." Clara looked directly at him. "If you take those boats, the southern families cannot cross the flooded road. If you seize the lighthouse, you remove the only store of dry grain outside the marsh." He knew she was telling the truth. She had shown him those supply arrangements 4 years earlier. Nevertheless, Sir Edmund placed an emergency order before him, transferring control of the lighthouse, fishing boats, harbour ledgers, and all surviving archive materials to a temporary county commission. Percival's name had been written as chief administrator before his disappearance. Octavia's brother, Lord Fenwick, was named financial guarantor. "Do not sign that," Clara said. "Percival controls the warehouse keys, and Fenwick controls the private key. You will place every road, boat, and record beneath the same alliance." Sebastian's eyes remained upon the order. "The commission expires when the inquiry concludes. By then, there may be nothing left to recover. I cannot permit disputed property to remain outside legal supervision." "You mean outside your control?" Sebastian signed. The moment the pen left the page, Clara stopped thinking of Ravenswick as a marriage she might somehow restore. Sebastian had been warned about the flood, the false seal, the altered tide table, the silk thread. Percival's flight, and the fire. He had been offered a drawer containing evidence and had chosen not to open it. This was no longer a misunderstanding created by clever enemies. It was his decision. Clara held out her hands to the constable. "Take me to the jail, but send Gideon to the church first. He must warn the fishermen that the commission will attempt to seize their boats." Sir Edmund ordered her wrists bound. Sebastian flinched at the sight of the iron cuffs, yet he did not stop it. As the prison carriage rolled away, Clara unfolded the corner of Belle's tide table, hidden inside her sleeve. Elias had marked 4 moonless arrivals, but a 5th cross appeared beside the hour before dawn. Through the barred window, she looked toward the black harbor. 3 lanterns blinked once from the private Fenwick quay, and then vanished. Far beyond them, sails without navigation lights were approaching Ravenswick. The explosion and flood had not been intended merely to destroy records. They had emptied the roads, scattered the harbor crews, and placed every patrol boat under Percival's commission. Whatever waited aboard those ships would enter unchallenged before sunrise. The 3 vessels entered Ravenswick harbor with their lamps extinguished and their sails reefed for silence. Even through the barred window of the prison carriage, Clara could judge their displacement. They rode high above the water, their lower hulls clearly visible whenever moonlight broke through the clouds. "They are empty," she said. The constable opposite her glanced toward the harbor. "Empty ships do not concern prisoners. They will concern every man in Ravenswick when they leave carrying the crown's gunpowder." The constable's expression changed, but the carriage continued toward the county jail. At the lower crossroads, they encountered a crowd of fishermen blocking the road. Commission officers were seizing their boats under the emergency order Sebastian had signed, cutting mooring ropes and driving families away from the quay. Gideon Shaw stood on the steps of the customs house, with blood on his knuckles, while 6 armed men surrounded him. "Those vessels belong to the Widows' Cooperative," he shouted. "Not anymore," replied a commission captain. "All harbor property is under Lord Fenwick's guarantee until the treason inquiry concludes." Clara struck the carriage wall with her cuffed hands. "Stop!" The driver ignored her until a fishing cart overturned in front of the horses. She forced open the window and called to Gideon. "The incoming ships are empty. Percival intends to load them from the private quay." Gideon looked toward the dark water and understood. Before he could answer, the Gale constables dragged him away from the carriage. The commission captain produced Sebastian's signed order and directed that Gideon be confined for obstructing lawful seizure. Clara could do nothing, as the only experienced harbor master was taken into custody beside her. The document had converted Percival's hired men into lawful officers and reduced those protecting the coast to criminals. At the jail, Clara was placed in a damp stone room overlooking the inner harbor. Gideon occupied the neighboring cell. Through the narrow windows, they watched the first unlit vessel drift toward Fenwick's private quay, while commission boats cleared its path. "The Duke will stop them when he sees what is happening," Gideon said. "He cannot," Clara replied. "He transferred harbor authority to the commission. If he revokes it before the Admiralty inquiry, Sir Edmund will claim he interfered to conceal treason." The words were barely finished when Sebastian rode into the Gale yard. His shirt was still blackened from the archive fire, and fury had stripped away every trace of aristocratic composure. He demanded Clara's release and ordered the commission captain to block the private quay. Sir Edmund arrived behind him, with Lady Octavia and 2 uniformed Admiralty officers. "You possess no authority to command the harbor tonight," the magistrate reminded him. "Your own signature placed it under independent supervision." Sebastian stared at the order, as if the ink had changed since he placed it there. "I signed that to preserve evidence, not to admit unidentified ships. Lord Fenwick's office has identified them as grain carriers hired to remove stores threatened by the flood." Clara gripped the bars. "They cannot be grain carriers. Their hulls are empty, yet they arrived before anyone could know the western fields were lost." One Admiralty officer looked toward the harbor, but Octavia spoke first. Clara spent 9 months at the lighthouse, observing ship movements. Her knowledge may prove involvement rather than innocence. Sebastian's gaze rose to the cell window. Let her out. She understands these waters better than anyone present. You publicly accused her of selling restricted charts, Sir Edmund said. Now you ask the Crown to entrust the same woman with the harbour, because your estate is in danger. Which judgment should we believe, Your Grace? Sebastian had no answer. His betrayal had destroyed Clara's credibility and his own. A cry rose from the quay as workers opened the first warehouse. Crates marked with the Ravenswick crest were carried toward the waiting ship. One slipped from a hoist and shattered on the stones. Straw spilled across the ground, followed by dozens of naval muskets wrapped in oilcloth. The Admiralty officers went rigid. Sir Edmund immediately ordered the warehouse sealed in the Crown's name. Sebastian pushed past him, but the commission guards lowered their rifles. Those weapons are not mine. They bear your mark, and were stored on your land, under the authority of your appointed administrator, the senior officer replied. Until this matter is resolved, the Admiralty is seizing Ravenswick Harbour, its customs revenue, and every ducal warehouse. The sentence struck Sebastian with more force than the explosion. The harbour funded nearly half his estate. Without its revenue, he could not repair the reservoir, replace the ruined grain, or pay compensation to flooded tenants. He had given Percival the authority that placed the weapons there, expelled the woman who might have detected them, and signed the commission that allowed the conspirators to move them openly. Octavia stepped close to him. My brother can extend Ravenswick emergency credit. The Fenwick fortune can protect the estate until the inquiry ends. Clara understood the true mechanism at last. The scheme did not merely intend to smuggle weapons or condemn her. Percival was destroying Ravenswick's income, while Octavia's family positioned itself as the only source of rescue. Once Sebastian married her and accepted Fenwick credit, they would control the harbour through debt, even if the criminal evidence vanished. Clara had been targeted because her management kept Ravenswick solvent, and because she could distinguish honest shipping losses from engineered ones. A second crate broke open, but it contained small barrels rather than muskets. Clara saw the white crystalline residue around one damaged lid. "Move everyone away from that warehouse," she shouted. "That is powder exposed to water. If the barrels dry near those lanterns, the dust may ignite." Sir Edmund accused her of creating panic, but Sebastian did not hesitate this time. He rang the key alarm and personally drove labourers back. Clara could have remained silent and allowed his warehouse to burn. Instead, she directed Gideon through the wall to tell the fishermen how to flood the stone loading trench without spreading sparks. They passed her instructions through the gale windows. The workers opened the trench gates, and black water surged across the quay, carrying the spilled powder safely into the harbour. Clara protected the dock families, not Sebastian's fortune. When the immediate danger passed, Gideon reached through the gap between their cells and handed her a scrap of sailcloth. A fisherman had pushed it into his sleeve during the arrest. Written upon it in charcoal were 4 words: Belle, alive, third ship. Clara looked toward the last vessel. Its anchor was already rising as the tide began to turn. "How long before it clears the reef?" Gideon asked. Clara measured the retreating water against the harbour steps. 37 minutes. Beyond the barred window, the third ship unfurled its dark sails and began carrying the only living witness to sea. 37 minutes, Clara repeated, raising her voice so the senior Admiralty officer could hear. After that, the tide will carry the third ship beyond the reef, and Elias Bell will disappear with it. Commander Jonathan Hale approached the cell. Unlike Sir Edmund, he had spent enough years at sea to understand the urgency in her calculation. "How do you know Bell is aboard?" Clara pushed the charcoal-marked sailcloth through the bars. "A fisherman saw him and passed this to Captain Shaw during our arrest. Question the man if you wish, but do it after stopping the vessel." Hale examined the cloth, then looked toward the harbour. "The Commission controls every patrol boat." Because Sebastian's order gave it control, Clara said. But the parish rescue lugger is held in trust by St. Ormond's Church. It does not belong to the estate, the harbour, or the fishing cooperative. Percival cannot lawfully seize it. Sebastian stepped closer. Where is it moored? Inside the eastern drainage channel. The route I built to protect the marsh gives it access to the outer harbour without passing Fenwick's Quay. Sir Edmund protested that Clara remained a prisoner, but Hale had seen the muskets and heard her warning about the powder. He ordered her cuffs removed and released Gideon into Admiralty custody. "You will accompany us under guard," he said. "If this is deception, Lady Clara, your position becomes considerably worse." "If it is deception, Commander, I will return to the cell without argument." The rescue lugger Mercy waited where Clara promised, sheltered behind the newly opened overflow trench. Its crew consisted of fishermen who had evacuated their families to the church and returned, despite the Commission's threats. They accepted Gideon's orders, but it was Clara's voice they trusted when she directed them toward the old eastern channel. Sebastian boarded before Sir Edmund could stop him. Clara confronted him beside the mast. "You do not command this vessel." The Duke looked at the fishermen, none of whom lowered their eyes to him. "I understand. If you interfere with Gideon, question my navigation before the crew, or attempt to remove Bell from Admiralty protection, I will put you ashore." The words would once have been unthinkable between husband and wife. Sebastian merely nodded. "Those are your terms. Those are the beginning of them." Mercy moved through the flooded channel and entered open water as the third ship approached the reef. Its dark sails were full, but Clara noticed the helmsman steering too far north. He was following Percival's altered tide table, which marked a passage where shifting sand had closed the channel months earlier. "He will ground beside Widow's Teeth," she said. Gideon altered course to intercept. 5 minutes later, the larger vessel struck the hidden bank and lurched violently. Its crew threw cargo overboard in an attempt to lighten the hull. Crates bearing the Ravenswick crest splashed into the sea. Commander Hale ordered the captain to surrender in the Crown's name. A musket shot answered, tearing through Mercy's mainsail. Sebastian moved instinctively in front of Clara, but she pushed him aside so she could see the stranded ship. "Do not protect me by blocking the only person who can guide us through these rocks." Shame flickered across his face as he obeyed. Gideon brought Mercy alongside the grounded vessel, under covering fire from Hale's Marines. The struggle was brief. Percival's hired sailors had expected an undefended harbour, not armed Admiralty officers. Clara boarded behind Hale and found Elias Bell bound inside the chart cabin. He was bruised and dehydrated, but alive. His first words were not about his captors. "Martha, safe at St. Ormond's," Clara assured him. Elias closed his eyes in relief, then pointed toward a sea chest bolted beneath the table. Inside were replacement tide tables, shipping orders signed in Percival's name, and a small iron branding die carved with the Ravenswick crest. Cream silk thread had been wound around its handle to protect the user's palm from heat. Clara did not touch any of it. She asked Hale to inventory the objects, seal the chest, and have 2 Marines witness its transfer. The commander recorded where each item had been found and placed the cabin under guard. For the first time, their proof possessed a custody no magistrate could quietly dispute. Elias explained that Percival's men had forced him to alter reservoir measurements. When he refused to surrender the original table, they abducted him, dressed another drowned man in his coat, and transported him aboard the waiting ship. He had seen weapons move through the northern gate, but he had not seen who financed them. "Mr. Dane spoke often with a woman," he said. "She never entered the warehouse. Her carriage waited beyond the wall." "Could you identify her?" Sebastian asked. "Not by face. By voice, perhaps." It was fragile evidence, incomplete, but real. On the return journey, Gideon told Commander Hale how Clara had financed the overflow channels after Sebastian's estate council rejected the expense. She had used 4 years of pin money and the income from shipping contracts she negotiated herself. Sebastian overheard. "You told me the estate paid for those works, because you would have stopped me if you knew I had used my settlement allowance," Clara said. "You considered harbor engineering an unsuitable obsession for a duchess." He looked toward the marsh her channels had saved. "I mocked the work that preserved my people, then handed it to Percival and allowed him to claim it." "Yes." She offered no comfort. "I did not know. You did not ask." When they reached shore, Sebastian requested that she return to Ravenswick Hall for protection. Clara refused. The parish vestry stood on land held by the church, beyond the Emergency Commission's authority. She would establish her base there with Martha, Elias, Amos, Gideon, and 2 Admiralty guards. She would cooperate only through Commander Hale, with written records of every interview and no private handling of evidence by Sebastian, Octavia, Sir Edmund, or the Fenwick family. Sebastian accepted each condition. As the sealed sea chest was carried toward the church, a rider galloped from Ravenswick Hall and handed Octavia a message. Clara saw her read it, glance toward the rescued Elias Bell, and crush the paper inside her glove. Octavia no longer regarded Clara as a discarded wife, begging to be believed. She regarded her as the one obstacle capable of destroying everything. That night, while 2 Marines guarded the vestry door, smoke began seeping from beneath the floor, where Commander Hale had locked the evidence chest. Clara dropped to her knees and pressed her palm against the vestry floor. Heat pulsed through the boards directly beneath the evidence chest. "The fire is below us," she shouted. Commander Hale ordered the Marines to carry Elias, Martha, and Amos into the church nave, while Gideon forced open the cellar hatch behind the altar. Smoke poured upward, thick with the bitter smell of lamp oil. The 2 guards at the vestry door had never abandoned their post. The attacker had entered through an exterior coal passage concealed behind the graveyard wall. By the time Sebastian and the villagers formed a bucket line, flames had wrapped around the underside of the chest. Hale broke the Admiralty seals himself. The branding die survived, but the replacement tide tables and Percival's signed shipping orders crumbled into black fragments when air touched them. Water from the buckets reduced the remaining paper to pulp. Their carefully protected proof was destroyed in front of the very witnesses meant to preserve it. Elias watched from the nave, his bruised face collapsing with despair. Those orders named every man involved. "You are alive," Clara told him. "Your testimony remains." Sir Edmund entered through the church doors before dawn, accompanied by Octavia, Lord Fenwick, and a dozen commission officers. He surveyed the burned chest with grim satisfaction, disguised as official concern. "This is precisely why evidence should have remained in county custody." Hale's expression hardened. The chest was under Admiralty guard, and Lady Clara selected this building. Her associates knew where the objects were kept. Octavia removed her hood, revealing a face composed for public sorrow. "No one wishes to accuse Clara unjustly, but we must consider whether the so-called rescue was designed to introduce documents that could not survive examination." Elias lunged toward her voice. "That is the woman!" The commission guard seized him before he crossed the aisle. Octavia stepped back in perfect shock. "I have never spoken to this man. I heard you through the warehouse wall," Elias insisted. "You told Percival the Duke would sign anything if treason bore his wife's handwriting." The accusation stirred the refugees sheltering in the pews, but Sir Edmund immediately discredited it. Mr. Bell was found aboard a smuggling ship beside forged records. His attempt to implicate Lady Octavia may be an effort to purchase leniency. He then produced a sworn statement from the stable boy claiming Clara had dictated the message containing the words "Burn Bell's original table" and instructed him to attribute it to Octavia. The boy stood behind the officers, pale and trembling, unable to meet Clara's eyes. Octavia had found the weakest witness and transformed him into a weapon. Sir Edmund announced that the Admiralty inquiry would convene at noon in the County Assembly Hall. Until then, Clara's lighthouse accounts would remain frozen, Elias would be detained, and Martha would be removed to the parish poorhouse as a child without a lawful guardian. Clara moved in front of the girl. Martha has a living father, a father accused of arms smuggling. Then place her with Mrs. Alden under the vicar's authority. Sir Edmund refused. The attack had expanded beyond Clara's reputation. It now threatened the child, her remaining shelter, and every person who had trusted her. Sebastian stepped into the center aisle. His clothes were soaked from fighting the cellar fire, and exhaustion had hollowed his face, but his voice carried to the church doors. Martha Bell will remain here. Sir Edmund raised the commission order. You no longer control this investigation. No, Sebastian said, but I control the truth of how it began. He turned toward Commander Hale, the villagers, and the county officials gathering outside. 9 months ago, I accused my wife of treason without permitting an independent examination of the charts found in her cabinet. She requested 48 hours to test the ink, paper, and tidal calculations. I refused, because I considered doubt an insult to my authority. Octavia whispered his name in warning. He continued, I gave Lord Percival access to my private seal impressions. I dismissed the harbour master who questioned him. I removed Clara's name from works she designed and allowed my cousin to claim them. Tonight I signed a warrant after she warned me the evidence was false. I then transferred the harbour, boats, lighthouse, and surviving records to a commission containing the very men she identified as dangerous. Every admission weakened his defense before the crown. If Percival had used ducal authority to traffic weapons, Sebastian could lose public office, customs privileges, and control of Ravenswick for years. I also announced an engagement while my lawful wife's separation remained unresolved, he said, looking at Octavia. That engagement is ended. I will accept no Fenwick credit and no marriage bargain designed to purchase silence. Lord Fenwick walked out, taking the promise of emergency funds with him. Octavia's composure cracked only for an instant. You condemn your estate because a desperate woman has revived your guilt. I condemn my own choices, Sebastian replied. Clara owes me neither defense nor forgiveness. His confession cost him his alliance and publicly established his failures, but it did not restore the burned documents. Sir Edmund still ordered Elias confined and announced that Clara would face the inquiry at noon. When the church emptied, she examined the surviving branding die beneath Hale's supervision. The cream silk around its handle had burned away, exposing shallow scratches where the metal had repeatedly struck something harder than wood. Clara remembered the blackened key she brought to the banquet. Its edge bore matching crescent-shaped dents. Elias had not used that key merely for the northern sluice. He had used it to test the heated branding die, striking metal against metal to prove the crest was false. Then she remembered Martha's exact words. The gentleman burned Sebastian's mark onto every crate. The child had said gentleman, while Elias claimed the person directing Percival was a woman whose face he never saw. Octavia believed those accounts contradicted each other. Clara now understood that they described two different people performing two different roles. Percival marked the crates. Octavia supplied the schedule. The destroyed tide tables were never the only record of that schedule. Ships entering Fenwick's private quay required signal flags from the cliff tower, and the tower keeper recorded every flag in the parish bell book because the signals determined when fog bells were rung. That book had been kept in the church nave for 50 years, unnoticed because it was not a harbour document. Clara opened it and found cream silk fibres pressed inside the pages, marking 5 moonless nights. Beside each date appeared a signal authorized with the initials OF. Octavia would claim the initials belonged to another person, and the fibres alone could be dismissed. Clara needed her to reveal knowledge only the organizer possessed. She closed the book and gave it to Commander Hale for sealing. At noon, announced that Bell's original tide table survived the fire, she said. State that it identifies the vessel scheduled for the 6th moonless arrival, But do not name the ship. Hale studied her. There was no sixth arrival on the recovered table. Octavia does not know that. If she believes the table exists, she will have to explain why its prediction is false. To do so, she must name the ship, the date, and the signal, facts we have never disclosed. Clara looked toward the assembly hall as its bells announced the approaching inquiry. We will not ask her to confess. We will give her one lie she cannot resist correcting. At noon, the county assembly hall held more people than it had during Sebastian's engagement announcement. Flooded tenants crowded the rear benches beside merchants, fishermen, naval officers, and landowners whose grain now lay beneath black water. Commander Hale stationed one marine beside Amos and another beside Elias, while Martha remained at St. Ormond's under Mrs. Alden's care with 2 armed guards. The surviving branding die, the blackened sluice key, the reservoir wax, and the sealed parish bell book rested on separate tables under Admiralty custody. Clara had insisted that no witness, object, or record be left in the sole care of Sebastian's household or Sir Edmund's commission. Octavia entered on her brother's arm, wearing dark blue silk instead of bridal ivory, transforming herself from rejected fiancée into an injured woman of dignity. Sir Edmund attacked first. He described Clara as a resentful, estranged wife who had used her knowledge of Ravenswick's coast to arrange illicit shipments, then returned, during Sebastian's engagement, to manufacture a public rescue. He claimed Elias Bell was her accomplice, Gideon her loyal agent, and the church fire an attempt to destroy forged documents before experts could examine them. The muskets bearing the Ravenswick crest, he argued, proved Clara's access to ducal property rather than Percival's guilt. Every disaster increased her influence, he concluded. Every supposed discovery required knowledge possessed primarily by Lady Clara herself. It was plausible enough to bring unease into the room. Octavia then testified that Clara had always resented aristocratic restraints and had spoken of controlling the harbor independently. She denied sending the message to burn Bell's table and repeated the stable boy's accusation that Clara had dictated it. I loved Sebastian, she said softly. I wished only to help restore an estate his wife had placed in danger. Clara waited until Sir Edmund finished. Then she asked Commander Hale to display the emergency commission order. Who appointed Percival chief administrator? I did, Sebastian answered from the front bench. Who gave him access to the private seal impressions used on harbor orders? I did. Who dismissed Gideon after he refused to approve Percival's unregistered cargo? Sebastian's jaw tightened. I confirmed the dismissal. Clara did not soften the consequences for him. And who signed the order placing every patrol boat, warehouse, and surviving record beneath Percival's commission after I warned that he controlled the private key? I did. His answers did not prove her innocence, but they destroyed the claim that only Clara possessed the access required to conduct the scheme. Percival had gained that access through Sebastian's deliberate choices. Clara next placed the forged naval chart beside an authentic harbor survey she completed 4 years earlier. The accusation against me depends upon these tidal annotations being mine. On my genuine chart, soundings are measured from the mean low water mark, the method my father taught every surveyor in his yard. On the forged chart, they are measured from the spring high water mark. Commander Hale confirmed that the second method was used by commercial captains seeking maximum cargo depth, not by naval cartographers planning defensive patrols. The forger copied my handwriting, Clara said, but not the system that gave the numbers meaning. She then called Amos. He testified that a masked man carrying Percival's order demanded Bell's original records and entered Clara's former map chamber with a key controlled by the estate administration. He identified the brass ruler used to wedge the fire door as an object left in that room after Clara's exile. Sir Edmund suggested Amos was confused by smoke, but Hale produced the physician's written assessment, confirming that the copyist had remained lucid. Elias spoke next. He described being forced to replace the reservoir measurements and being held aboard the third ship after refusing to surrender his original table. He explained the dents on the blackened key. Before his abduction, he had struck its edge against the heated branding die when he discovered Percival marking gunpowder crates with the Ravenswick crest. Percival's men later took the key and planted it beneath the unidentified corpse wearing Elias's coat, intending the object to connect the dead traitor to Clara. Hale placed the key against the die. The crescent dents aligned with the scratches exposed when the cream thread burned away. Octavia remained composed. All of this implicates Lord Percival. It says nothing about me. Not yet, Clara replied. Commander Hale announced that a portion of Bell's original tide table had survived inside the iron lining of the sea chest. According to that fragment, he said, a sixth moonless arrival had been scheduled for the vessel Morning Star on November 18th, using 3 white harbor lamps as its signal. Octavia's head turned before she could stop herself. That is impossible. Clara let the silence lengthen. Why? Because the Morning Star never used Ravenswick. How would you know which ships used a smuggling route you claim never to have seen? Octavia recovered quickly. My brother owns the private key. I have heard ship names discussed at dinner. Then perhaps you can explain why the surviving table is wrong. The trap offered her 2 choices: remain silent and allow the fictional 6th arrival to be treated as genuine, or correct it, using knowledge unavailable to an innocent visitor. Vanity and the need for control defeated caution. The 6th ship was St. Cyprian, Octavia said. It was due on November 21st, not the 18th, and the signal was 2 blue flags from the cliff tower, not 3 lamps. Lord Fenwick closed his eyes. Sir Edmund went perfectly still. Clara had never disclosed a 6th date, a vessel, or any flag signal. Neither had Elias, Gideon, Sebastian, or Commander Hale. You are mistaken, Octavia said, hearing her own error too late. Percival mentioned it at the engagement dinner. Sebastian rose. Percival's last dinner at Ravenswick was 9 days before St. Cyprian received that name. I know because I signed the vessel's registration transfer afterward. Clara turned to the sealed parish bell book. This record was kept beyond the estate's control. It contains the cliff tower signals for every moonless arrival, cream silk pressed between the relevant pages, and the initials of the person who authorized them. Commander Hale has held it under seal since before this inquiry. Octavia's face had lost all color. Initials prove nothing. Perhaps not, Clara said. But the entry for November 21st will prove whether the ship, date, and 2 blue flags you just named were recorded before or after you claim Percival told you. Hale broke the Admiralty seal, opened the bell book, and turned to the page Clara had marked. Beneath his hand waited the final line Octavia could not explain. The final line in the parish bell book read, November 21st, St. Cyprian, 2 blue flags, authorized O. Fenwick. Beneath it was a payment notation directing the tower keeper to collect 5 guineas from Fenwick House, followed by the same unusual looped signature Octavia had placed on the guest register before Sebastian's engagement banquet. Commander Hale compared the 2 entries before the entire hall. Dismissal gave way to doubt, doubt to silence, and silence to recognition. Octavia claimed the signature had been copied, but Clara had anticipated the defense. A forger might imitate your name, she said. A forger could not make you correct a fictional ship schedule, using details concealed inside a sealed book. Elias then repeated the sentence he had heard through the warehouse wall. Octavia responded angrily that he had misunderstood her discussion with Percival about the 2nd reservoir release. Clara had never mentioned a 2nd planned release. Octavia stopped speaking as the trap closed around her. The stable boy began to sob. Under Commander Hale's protection, he admitted that Sir Edmund had threatened to send his widowed mother from her cottage unless he signed the false statement against Clara. He had delivered Octavia's message and had seen her bind it with cream silk cut from the sewing case inside her carriage. Sir Edmund ordered the boy removed, but Hale's marines stepped between them. Clara then assembled the complete chain. Octavia wanted Ravenswick's title and harbour. Her brother wanted its customs revenue. Percival wanted enough Fenwick money to escape the debts he had concealed from Sebastian. Together they copied Clara's handwriting onto false naval charts, but they misunderstood her sounding system and lunar calculations. Sebastian chose to believe the accusation, exiled his wife, dismissed the people loyal to her, and transferred authority to Percival. That betrayal removed the only person capable of recognizing the altered tides. Percival then replaced the harbour crews, moved stolen naval weapons through the northern gate, and branded the crates with the Ravenswick crest. When Elias discovered the false measurements, they abducted him and dressed an unidentified drowned man in his coat, planting the blackened key beneath the body to connect Clara with the contraband. The explosion, reservoir flood, and archive fire were not separate acts. They scattered the harbour patrols, destroyed financial records, ruined Sebastian's grain income, and frightened him into signing the emergency commission. Octavia then offered Fenwick credit and marriage as the only rescue. Had the 3 ships departed before dawn, Clara would have been condemned as the smuggler, Sebastian would have remained legally responsible for the weapons, and the Fenwicks would have acquired Ravenswick's harbour through debt. Octavia's contempt had been her fatal error. She understood Sebastian's pride, but underestimated the wife whose work she intended to steal. Commander Hale ordered Octavia, Sir Edmund, and Lord Fenwick detained. Marines found Percival hiding inside the cliff signal tower with the remaining payments and the original key to Clara's chart cabinet. His debts, letters, and instructions confirmed the conspiracy. Octavia and Percival were committed for trial on charges involving arms theft, arson, abduction, and fraud. Sir Edmund lost his commission and faced prosecution for coercing witnesses and abusing his office. Lord Fenwick's private key and vessels were seized to repay the crown and the flooded tenants. The stable boy received protection in exchange for truthful testimony. Elias was cleared, reunited with Martha, and restored as keeper of the northern sluice. Yet the conspirators' guilt did not absolve Sebastian. Before the same county that had heard him renounce Clara, he withdrew every accusation and named his own failures without blaming manipulation. He admitted that he had refused investigation, erased her achievements, signed her arrest warrant, seized property supporting innocent families, and empowered the people who attacked his estate. The Crown suspended his customs authority for 2 years and placed Ravenswick Harbour under Commander Hale's supervision. Sebastian sold his London residence and several unentailed properties to compensate the tenants, rebuild the reservoir, replace the widow's boats, and repay every pound Clara had spent from her personal allowance. He executed a new settlement placing the lighthouse, her chart-making income, and a substantial maintenance fund in trust for Clara's separate use. He restored her name to every engineering plan and harbour record, but he did not ask her to return to Ravenswick Hall. Their marriage remained lawful. Clara chose formal separation and a residence beyond his control. 6 months later, the lighthouse reopened as the Ravenswick School of Navigation, where fishermen's daughters learned chart-making, mathematics, and commercial accounts. Clara chaired an independent coastal board, alongside Gideon, Elias, Amos, and 2 elected tenants. Sebastian attended only when invited. He sent written reports, accepted public scrutiny, and never used repair as a bargain for affection. On the morning the new northern floodgate opened, he waited outside the lighthouse, holding the same blackened iron key Clara had placed before him at the engagement banquet. "It belongs to you," he said. "No," Clara replied. "It belongs to the people responsible for the gate." She placed the key in Martha's hand, making the young keeper's daughter the first student permitted to operate the new mechanism. Sebastian watched her turn it, his expression carrying remorse without expectation. "I do not know whether I can forgive you," Clara told him. "I know. And forgiveness, if it comes, will not return us to what we were. I would not ask it to." Clara handed him a folded schedule for the following month's public board meeting. It was not an invitation back into her home or her marriage. It was one measured opportunity to continue proving that his repentance could survive without reward. "You may attend," she said. "You may listen. You will not command." Sebastian accepted the terms. Clara then opened the lighthouse doors herself and walked inside beside Martha, leaving him to follow only after she chose not to close them.